That evening was quiet, the kind that makes you hear your own thoughts more clearly. I had just moved into a small neighborhood on the edge of the city, hoping to find some peace after months of noise and stress. The streets were lined with old trees, and the air always smelled faintly of rain. My next-door neighbors, Rayhan and his wife Sarah, were the first to welcome me. They seemed warm, polite, and deeply kind. Rayhan was the kind of man who greeted everyone with a smile, while Sarah's calmness made the whole place feel lighter. Over the next few weeks, our small interactions turned into short evening conversations. Sometimes Rayhan would invite me for tea, and Sarah would bring out snacks, laughing softly at her husband's old jokes. Watching them together gave me a strange sense of comfort, like seeing what love was supposed to look like. I often thought how lucky they were to have each other, but something about their smiles sometimes looked tired, as if they were holding on to something fragile. One night, while I was sitting on my balcony, I heard faint voices from their side of the wall. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't laughter either. It was the kind of silence between words that tells you things aren't fine. I tried not to listen, telling myself that every couple has hard days. Still, something about the tone in Rayhan's voice, low, heavy, stayed with me. The next day, Rayhan came over. His usual cheerful face seemed pale, his smile uncertain. He asked if I could join them for tea later that evening. There was a pause before he said it, as if he wanted to say something else but couldn't. I agreed without asking questions. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different. The lights were dimmer than usual, and the air in the room carried an uneasy stillness. Sarah smiled politely but didn't say much. Rayhan spoke about work, about how tough things had been lately. I nodded along, though I could sense his thoughts drifting elsewhere. After a few minutes, Sarah excused herself and went inside, leaving her cup half full on the table. Rayhan sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that feels like it's been waiting for weeks to escape. "You ever feel," he said quietly, "that life gives you everything you asked for but still takes away something you can't name?" I didn't know how to answer, so I just listened. He talked about how work pressure had taken over his time, how he barely saw his wife, how the distance between them grew even when they sat next to each other. There was no anger in his words, just sadness. I could feel his loneliness, though his house was full and his life seemed settled. That night, when I went back home, I kept thinking about the two of them. Sometimes, I thought, people don't lose love because it disappears. They lose it because they stop noticing it. And that realization stayed with me, as I looked at the light from their window fading slowly into the quiet dark. The next evening, Rayhan called me again. His voice sounded calmer, but there was a quiet weight behind it. When I reached his house, Sarah was sitting in the living room, looking through an old photo album. She smiled faintly when I entered, but her eyes told a different story, one of exhaustion and memories that had lost their color. Rayhan poured tea for all of us, and for a few minutes, no one spoke. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence between us. Eventually, Rayhan began to talk, not about work this time, but about life. He said he felt like everything around him was changing too fast, and he couldn't keep up. "I used to dream of building something big," he said, "but now I don't even know what I'm building it for." Sarah didn't interrupt. She simply sat there, her hands clasped together, her eyes resting on the cup in front of her. I tried to ease the mood, talking about small things, books, travel, the weather, but Rayhan kept drifting back to the same thought, how time changes people quietly, without asking permission. "Sarah's been patient," he admitted. "More than I deserve. But I can't seem to reach her anymore." His words weren't dramatic, just real. It was the sound of someone realizing what they had been losing. Slowly, day after day, Sarah finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "It's not about reaching, Rayhan," she said. "It's about being present. You can sit beside someone every day and still feel miles apart." Her words hung in the air, honest and heavy. Rayhan looked at her, but didn't reply. Sometimes silence says more than any argument could. As I sat there, I understood that betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting or broken trust. Sometimes it's quiet, a result of forgetting to care, forgetting to listen. What I saw between them wasn't anger or blame, it was two people standing on opposite sides of a bridge they once built together, unsure how to cross back. When I left their house that night, I noticed how still everything felt. The streetlight flickered softly, and the air carried the faint scent of rain again. I thought about how fragile relationships are, how easily distance grows between hearts when effort fades. At home, I couldn't sleep. Rayhan's words echoed in my head, his longing to fix what felt unfixable. Sarah's voice too, calm but full of quiet pain. I realized how many people live in houses that look perfect from the outside but are quietly falling apart inside. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about forgetting that love, like any living thing, needs care to survive. And as I turned off the light that night, I knew something between them had changed forever, even if no one had said it out loud. A few days later, the neighborhood felt strangely quiet. I hadn't seen Rayhan or Sarah outside, and their house looked darker than usual. One afternoon, while I was watering the small plants near my gate, an old friend of Rayhan's stopped by, asking if he was home. When I told him I hadn't seen Rayhan lately, he sighed and mentioned that Rayhan had been thinking about leaving the city for a new job alone. The word hung heavy in the air. Alone that evening, I saw movement in their yard. Sarah was sitting on the front steps, staring into the distance as if waiting for something. I hesitated before walking over, but when she saw me, she smiled faintly. "He's leaving," she said quietly, before I could even ask. "He didn't tell me directly. I just found out." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes glistened under the soft streetlight. Moments later, Rayhan appeared at the door, holding a small travel bag. His face was calm, but his eyes carried a storm. "I need some time," he said. "To think, to start fresh. Maybe I'll come back when I've figured things out." Sarah stood still, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. Then she whispered, "You don't have to leave to think, Rayhan. You just have to stay long enough to listen." There was a long silence between them. I felt like an outsider to something deeply human, a moment when two people finally said everything without shouting. Rayhan lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "I've already made up my mind," he said softly. "I don't want to hurt you anymore by pretending I'm the same person I used to be." Sarah nodded, a single tear falling quietly down her cheek. "Love isn't about being the same person," she said. "It's about growing without forgetting each other." Her voice broke a little, and Rayhan looked away. He picked up his bag, paused for a second, then turned to me. "Take care of her," he said gently, not as a command but as a plea to someone he trusted. I nodded, unable to speak. As he walked away, the sound of his footsteps grew fainter until the night swallowed them completely. Sarah didn't move for a long time. The streetlight flickered, and the wind carried the sound of leaves brushing against the walls. She finally whispered, almost to herself, "Sometimes betrayal isn't someone leaving you. It's them giving up when you still believed there was something left to fight for." I stood there for a while, not knowing what to say. I understood then that not all betrayals are cruel. Some are born from silence, from the slow fading of effort, from forgetting that love is not just about feeling, it's about choosing, every day. And that night, as Rayhan's house stood dim and quiet, I realized that endings don't always come with anger. Sometimes, they come with acceptance. Weeks passed, and life slowly settled into a quiet rhythm again. Rayhan's house stood still, its windows closed, the garden beginning to grow wild without his care. Sarah stayed for a while after he left, keeping to herself, spending long hours on the porch with a book or just watching the sky change colors. I would often see her smile politely whenever our paths crossed, but her eyes told stories words never could. There was a calm acceptance in her, like someone who had finally stopped fighting the tide. One evening, as I returned from work, I saw a small truck parked outside their house. Boxes were stacked near the gate, and Sarah was standing beside them. She waved when she saw me. "I'm moving," she said softly. "It's time to start somewhere new." Her voice wasn't heavy with sadness anymore, it was steady, peaceful. She handed me a small envelope. "Thank you for listening when I couldn't speak," she said. "For being kind when everything felt uncertain." After she left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a short note written in neat handwriting. "Some visits change the way we see the world. Thank you for reminding me that healing doesn't always come from the people who hurt us, it sometimes comes from those who simply care." I read the words twice, then looked at her house one last time. The wind moved the curtain slightly, as if saying goodbye. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood returned to its quiet routine, but for me, something had shifted. I often thought about Rayhan and Sarah, not with sadness, but with understanding. Their story wasn't about blame, it was about the fragility of love when people stop tending to it. It reminded me how important it is to stay present, to notice the small moments before they disappear. Sometimes, I still sit on my balcony at night, looking at the empty house next door. The lights remain off, but the memories linger like faint echoes of laughter and conversations carried away by time. I've learned that betrayal isn't always a wound, it can also be a lesson that teaches us to love more honestly, to speak before silence becomes distance. As I finish my tea and watch the sky fade into stars, I think about how every story, even the painful ones, leaves behind something valuable. For Rayhan, it might be regret. For Sarah, strength. And for me, It's the quiet realization that every goodbye carries within it the chance for someone's new beginning. The night grows still again, and the only sound is the soft hum of crickets. I smile faintly and whisper to myself, some visits truly do change us forever.